Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good day from wherever you're joining from. My name is Tahil Sharma, and I'm the Regional Coordinator for North America at the United Religions Initiative, one of the world's largest organizations and networks dedicated to peace, justice, and healing, by focusing on the energy of grassroots interfaith communities and the power of grassroots work. I'm very excited for this important conversation today, focused on solitary confinement, also known as isolated confinement. And I'm very happily joined by staff people and very hardworking activists that are associated with the organization called NRCAT, which is the National Religious Campaign Against Torture. We decided to host this event here at URI North America, for an opportunity to explore maybe some deeper conversations on our end about how interfaith work can really transform and connect itself to a variety of different issues. We oftentimes assume that the space to connect people from various religious, spiritual, and secular backgrounds is only an attempt to have dialogue, build relationships, and create peaceful community. But what we often realize is that these are actually sort of the foundational steps to be able to build movements that can help address major injustices in society. And I couldn't actually think of a better example than the work that NRCAT is doing for the past several years, if not decades, in being able to address topics of torture. And today we are watching a specific film that is called Torture in Our Name, which is kind of dedicated to the unique stories of what this interfaith work looks like in trying to address the systemic injustice of solitary confinement in prison systems in the United States. For those that might not know entirely, there are sort of specific definitions for what solitary confinement is. Solitary or isolated confinement is the practice of confining incarcerated people alone or with another person for 22 to 24 hours a day. And this often means, complete isolation from the general public, whether within a jail system itself, or even the ability to go outside. That means you have minimal contact, minimal sunlight, programming, resources, or education. And you're set up in these sort of cells that provide you the minimum. Food is given to you from basically a metal slit through the door, and you are basically talking to yourself and the one person that checks in on you who might knock on the door. And that's a reality that thousands of folks have faced historically, with the system being associated to our jail system. An estimated 80,000 incarcerated adults and youth are held in solitary confinement. And we know that following the COVID-19 pandemic, that has actually exploded into having at least 300,000 people being reportedly placed in solitary confinement. Considering the impact of conversations that we have of social isolation, this is taken to extreme levels when it comes to our jail systems, where people are put into solitary confinement solely for the purpose of trying to prevent further violence, because it's done as a response often, or technically as it's said, to keep people who are already acting violently from doing things. When in reality, what reports have said time and time again is that many people who are placed in for nonviolent reasons. They are placed for convenience. They are placed for trying to, devolve situations. They are placed just for the matter of immediate decision making by those who are working in the jails. And that is an unfortunate situation to create. But what we do have an opportunity to actually discuss today is why it's so important to focus on the issue and what could we be doing to help resolve the issue in unique ways. NRCAT has been doing amazing work in states around the United States to really address this issue at the state level, where oftentimes they have advocated in states like New York, New Jersey, and Louisiana, which are some of the case studies we're going to be hearing about today. And we'll have an opportunity to speak to some really important folks who are involved in this work. So to jump right in, I'm going to show the film and make sure that those of you who are a part of the conversation can watch this 35-minute film with us. And then we will jump right into conversation. Ron, Naomi, Johnny, sound good? Fantastic. So based on that, let me make sure that everything is good to go. Looks like it. Let me screen.
The world that we live in is not evil. However, there are evil things that happen in this world, and they are diabolical. I defined isolated confinement as diabolical.
In 2021, 142 bills were introduced in 35 state legislatures to restrict or end solitary in prisons and jails. The National Religious Campaign Against Torture is working to resource and organize communities of faith and solitary survivors to arise in a moral call to end the torture being carried out in our names each and every day in hidden corners of our prisons, jails, and detention centers. The experts, those of us who have lived the torture of isolated confinement, are leading the charge, and together, all of us have a role to play.
You've heard a lot here today about the conditions of solitary. They're the human stories of things that should not happen to humans.
It sounds simplistic, but it is mental and sometimes physical torture. The self-harm that was done horrified me. I was in isolated confinement for 9.5 months. I did not grow up thinking anything about prisons. I never considered prisoners at all. So it was quite a shock to me. And isolated confinement, listening to people talk to the people who aren't there in their cells that they fully believe are there, listening to them scream for hours, and then go quiet. Where I was held, the walls were all cinder block, and then we had steel doors. So you would hear people punch their door, kick their door. I've heard officers say, so go ahead and kill yourself, next shift will take care of it. You know, what you gonna do? Hang yourself up? You don't have anything to do it with, I dare you. If somebody's in crisis, that doesn't help. Just newsflash.
I was fortunate to survive all that I survived, and I didn't even know I was surviving.
You can't sit in those spaces for all of that amount of time and nothing not be wrong with you. I came home, I left in 1988, I came home in 2018. My first night home, I slept on the bed. I couldn't sleep on the bed. I slept on the floor. I couldn't sleep on the floor. Smoke detector. It was too bright, and it was a little green light. So I went in, I opened the door, I saw the closet, I looked, I took the comforter, laid it on the floor, grabbed the pillow, laid down, went, closed the door, locked it, went right to sleep. 30 years of incarceration, I craved isolated confinement to feel safe. Nobody told me that was going to happen to me after my incarceration. But that was the psychological consequences of being in isolated confinement the way I was, unjustly, for all of those many times, for many different reasons that they manufactured. And then I brought that out to the community with me. Now, how do I tell my family, like, you know, I can't sleep in this room? How do I tell my community that? So I told the story before the Senate, was like, okay, the DOC, they want to keep this practice? Cool. Then they must take to the mental health and the deterioration of my mental health and my trauma and help me when I come back to the community. Where is those services at? Isolated confinement is a threat to the public health to any community of any returning citizen. Am I saying making cookies and cream? No, I'm saying don't make it dehumanizing. Don't make it debilitating. Don't make it psychic trauma.
I was born here in New Jersey, in Point Pleasant. I grew up on the Jersey Shore. I'm all for the Stone Pony and Springsteen, but life isn't always so happy.
So you have individuals who have been in isolated confinement in a cell by themselves for over 30 years. No human touch, nothing. They'll get letters, hopefully. You know, they get phone calls, maybe. But human touch, being able to have a visit with a relative, no, you'd have to visit them through a glass. For 30 years? How dare we as a society accept that? For those who don't even realize how they're participating in the system by turning a blind eye and not wanting to know more about it. You have to want to know what's going on. And let's not wait until a family member is incarcerated and they're being treated unfairly to now say, hey, I want to get involved. This is horrible. It's always been horrible. Let's not let it get to that point where it now touches your family. Let's put a stop to it.
And I was determined that was going to happen to me. So I just created a cell program, what I call cell program to survive. I would get up in the morning, I would read, write, exercise, I would write letters.
Do you call isolation torture?
I call isolation torture, and the United States has signed the convention, United Nations Convention Against Torture. The United States has signed the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights.
You can't legislate morality, but it's important to start with legislation. That's how things get done in this country.
We believe, all of us, that people that are directly affected by the issue have some of the most powerful voices.
At any given time, between 1,200 and 1,500 people in the state of New Jersey are in solitary confinement. And the racial disparity, the black to white racial disparity, is the highest in the country. We are talking 2/3 of women and 3/4 of men who are black and Hispanic are in solitary confinement. Something has to be done. Thank you. Well, the Survivors Bureau is a group, and it is a group of individuals who have survived incarceration, particularly here in New Jersey. That's where it began. Now, survivors are everywhere. We are the ones who, share our story. And in order to do that, we have to come together to do that. And that's how we have the Survivors Bureau.
We're all big proponents of speak with us, not for us. Because if you haven't been there, it's almost impossible to understand. Whatever religious or social or personal belief system you have likely does not extend to torturing other human beings. Don't let other people do that.
Most of the faith-based community is basically We're all on the same page. It's a grave injustice against humanity. It's a major social justice issue.
One of the very, very first things that we learn in Torah about humanity is that we are created in God's image. And that comes with obligations. That's true of everybody. That comes with obligations for us to treat humans as divine, which completely flies in the face of any possible justification one could ever have for torture. I always understood on an intuitive level that it was a brutal thing to do, but it was an important moment when I realized that it was a form of torture. And when I realized that it wasn't just, a punishment, but something that had long and deep emotional and psychological impacts.
When you entrust the institutions to do what they say they're going to do, which is to correct behavior or to even empower or even dissuade bad behavior, you expect that people are going to be coming home having learned something or having some sort of really positive human development, right? Transformation. And solitary confinement ultimately betrays all of those commitments.
You don't have to be the expert in advocacy. You don't have to be the expert in policy work. You don't have to even be the expert organizer. But be the expert in the morality, the justice, the storytelling. Tell the story. That's what faith leaders, regardless of faith, our job is to tell the story, instill hope, right? To see the divine in everyone. That's our lane.
The religious organizations need to come in because they bring the outside perspective. But don't settle yourself on saying, well, just this one group cares. Reach out to everyone, because there are people in all walks of life that care. Some don't understand what's going on.
You should be concerned because it's done in the interest of the citizens in which the state or the county the person is being punished. And they're doing it in your name. So whether you like it or not, they're doing it in your name. They're doing it to protect you. That's what they tell themselves. And this is why it's important to say, no, I don't need that kind of protection. It happens everywhere. If there's a prison, it happens.
Good evening again, council members. Reverend Alexis Anderson, East Baton Rouge Parish Prison Reform Coalition. If I can just take a moment of gratitude to the multiple groups that helped to bring awareness to what is now 55 fatalities in a primarily pretrial detention facility, making us the deadliest pretrial detention facility jail in the country.
We citizens demand accountability. We're standing here in unison and solidarity with the brothers and sisters who are behind that gate. This is an opportunity for us to put a face to incarceration so that we can see it's not just Kiana or it's not just Raymond, it's someone of you who are in this audience, and we are all impacted by it.
It's very hard for me to stand here before you today, knowing that in that facility behind me, I lost one of the greatest loves of my life. And to think of him in a cell where I wouldn't even want a dog, and where most of us would storm the building if there was a dog being subjected to that. We can use our common sense to understand and know that this is not right, that this is not justice. Only way to come against hate is with love and love is unconditional. And the only way to fight for human rights is to fight for it for every human, no matter what.
Help us to recognize that the inherent dignity of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. No one could have told me at the age of 17 that I would be sentenced to a life sentence. But thank God for change.
Amen.
So on the behalf of my sisters and brothers who are incarcerated, thank you for believing that they are worth more than the mistake that they made.
Amen. Amen.
Good morning. My name is Reverend Alexis Anderson. I represent the East Baton Rouge Parish Prison Reform Coalition. I am also the chair of the Faith Subcommittee of the Louisiana Stop Solitary Coalition. In East Baton Rouge Parish alone, we have had over 44 deaths, and a disproportionate amount of those since 2012 have involved interaction with the solitary confinement system.
My name is Kiana Calloway, and I am also a survivor of solitary confinement. Last year, we passed solitary confinement for pregnant women. This year, we're trying to strengthen that bill to add people with severe mental illnesses. America has been held by gatekeepers, and that's what the capital is. We have to walk into that space and be resilient and be honest and be transparent and give them the facts, because they don't know. You know, they don't know. I've probably served over 150,000 hours of incarceration, and probably 17,000 hours of that was in solitary confinement. So the power is not just impacted people. The power are impacted people, their friends, their families, and their allies. And that's what we are. We're a coalition of impacted people, friends, families, and allies. And it's all over the world. Look at the pros and look at the cons. Weigh it out, you know, and try to figure out if you believe that anyone deserves to be in solitary confinement. That's your beliefs. But if you feel to believe that no one deserves to be in solitary confinement, you need to reach out. You need to get in contact with your local coalition member, your local church that's influenced with this, or even start your own campaign. Over 80,000 people today, over 80,000 people in the U.S. today is probably trapped inside of a solitary cell. Because it's not just one person that's doing this. This is nationally. We have to understand we have a cell in every state, every city, every county, every parish, every town. There's someone in the cell. So if you have a jail in your county or your town, there's someone in the cell. Do your research.
We've lost so many individuals to solitary confinement when their health deteriorated inside and they were isolated and there was no one really to respond to their need. And if you're isolated in solitary confinement, you get no access to anything. No legal access, no access to programs, no access to family visits. Everything is taken away from you, right? You're already taken away from your community as a person who's been arrested, right? But you're not giving them the opportunity to reach back to the community to try to make an amends to whatever the situation was. And adding solitary confinement to that really puts a padlock on your access to community and legal services and all of the above.
We're live on the Million Dollar Steps in the capital of New York State.
We want justice! When do we want it? Now! When do we want it? Now! When do we want it? Now! Not now, but right 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 now! We're gonna get this real fast. We're gonna get this real done. We're gonna end solitary confinement in New York. Our suffrage, and we can't wait. We gotta hold solitary in New York State.
It may not be that your legislative bodies are as progressive as New York's own, but you can still find someone who has that human connection to people and realize that, you know, this could be my mom, my grandma, my pop, my grandpa, my son, my daughter, my grandchild, someone in some way can be connected to the individuals that are on the inside. And you know, I found for me, talking in different houses of worship, right, and sharing the work that we were doing around solitary confinement, I would then get people to come to me afterwards and say, you know, my son is incarcerated, on a whisper. And I would say, you know what, you need to be the voice for your son. My husband has been incarcerated for 25 years and they don't know in the church. You should tell the church. That's the only way you're gonna be best supported, to really get your loved one the support that they need. If it doesn't come from the outside, it doesn't happen. So just things like that is where you can begin to really talk to people and engage people with whatever the issue might be.
This is definitely a human rights issue that we're dealing with.
It has certainly changed me personally. Before I got involved with the HALT campaign, I had no idea what was going on in our prisons and jails. And I'm embarrassed to say that. I should have known more. At our congregation, we continue to meet on the 23rd of the month to remember those who are in solitary. And we're not a big group, but I ask them, how does this directly affect you? What does it mean to you to come every month to remember those in solitary? I mean, we're not out on the street corners, we're not, you know, converting people, but it is doing something to us personally. And I was really amazed. They were telling me how they share with their family and friends that they do this every month. And then that fosters a conversation about our criminal legal system and what people are suffering. And so I guess it's like that stone that you throw in the pond and the ripples just keep on going.
I had dreams as a young person, and they weren't to be an incarcerated person. They weren't dreams of being in solitary confinement, right? They weren't dreams of self-harm. I was dreaming of being an attorney, a teacher, you know, somebody that really helped people, a nurse. However, I knew that God had instilled those dreams in me to become that person. And God guided me. And He allowed me to use my voice and my experience to tell stories like I'm talking about today, my own experience mostly, right? To help people understand the impact that incarceration, isolation, and degradation has on the human spirit. It really took that spiritual connection for me to be able to say, I can make it out of here. I can make it out of here. And what do I want to do when I get out of here, right? I really want to help people understand that we make mistakes, but we are not those mistakes, and we should not live out the rest of our lives in that mistake. People should not die because they made a mistake. So many people have died in solitary confinement, either through their own self-harm or through other neglects of the system. We can become the people that God created us to be, loving, caring, sharing, productive members of a community that could then help the community thrive.
In New Jersey, Governor Chris Christie's decision to veto a bill that would limit solitary confinement in New Jersey jails and prisons is coming under fire.
In a harsh veto message, Christie says his administration doesn't use solitary confinement.
When that governor did that, I was still incarcerated. It kind of like kicks you in the gut, like telling you that what you did, where you were, you weren't. You know, like this did not exist. So you imagine this whole trauma that you experienced. I really was glad that they were bringing it back up to put before the legislature again and have the opportunity to say, yes, it does exist, that governor was wrong, you know, and we need to pass it and put it on this governor's desk.
It wasn't just a philosophical concept when we ultimately made major investments, both in time and resources, in people who had really borne the biggest impact of solitary confinement, the survivors.
So I am a survivor. My name is Mark Hopkins. I was originally sent to as seg, or sentenced to prison as a juvenile, waived up into the adult facilities. So my first time into solitary confinement, or restrictive housing, whichever term, if I was originally sent there when I was 15, going on 16.
When the governor was able to say that there's no isolated confinement, well, he can't say that to me because I was there. But he can say that to a church group, and they would know that it wasn't, but they had no evidence. So we are the evidence.
They got to hear it directly from us and not from people representing us. They finally realized that we were the experts. We've been in the State House talking to Senate aides and stuff like this about a myriad of things, but it wouldn't have happened if the people in our coalition, in our faith-based communities, and if they didn't have those connections. Me just going before the Senate is not going to make them want to sit there and just talk to me. It's about relationships. It's about building a network. It's about building a coalition. And it's about building power and capacity in that coalition.
Today, both the Assembly and the Senate are scheduled to vote on the bill. So this would be the last step in the legislature. If they pass those houses today, they will land on the governor's desk.
My hope is that the Senate will pass it, not only pass it, but pass it overwhelmingly to send a clear message to the governor that this is a bill about humanity. And we want to move New Jersey toward more humanity as a state.
To be here at this moment, to finally see this move from sitting on desks and fighting and being in meetings, and it's invigorating.
Bill 314 restricts use of isolated confinement in correctional facilities.
Thank you. Assembly Bill 314, having received 49 votes in the affirmative, 24 votes in the negative, and 5 abstentions, I declare the bill passed. Let the bill take judicial course and pass bills.
It helped to have us, faith-based people, educators, and even political people all together on the same movement and all involved to make a change in a system that's broken.
You will have pushback. There'll be great pushback. There'll be denials. There'll be people that believe that this is beneficial. You must see the world as it is, and then start to bend it toward the way it should be.
Particularly from the Judeo-Christian context, I mean, we all look at Moses and going to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's heart is hardened, and he's not going to let the people go. That's what it is. So by always being able to refer back, right? Refer back to our faith context. There's many examples to show us that this is what change looks like. There will be resistance. So that's how we remain hopeful, because we know how the story ends. And if we keep the good fight, if we truly believe that God is on the side of those that are hurting, those that have been oppressed, we'll get to the place of hope. It may be longer and we can also look at the historical context. As people of faith, particularly from a Black faith context, we can look at slavery and the abolition of slavery, and it was faith that really guided the abolitionist movement. We look at the civil rights movement, right? It was a long journey, but it was faith that guided that movement. We see ourselves at the point in the timeline and who we are and whose we are as a result.
No longer want it.
hours in New York. It effectively ends the use of long-term solitary confinement in prisons and jails.
When we think about the worst thing, not that we've done, but that someone else has done, or that you've heard or you're aware of, the worst, measure that by the good. The good always outweighs the bad. There's so much good.
Everybody can do something. And no matter how small you think your effort is, it matters. It matters to the person who spends 23 to 24 hours a day alone in a cell, usually with not much to do but count the cracks in the wall, sometimes for only a week or two, many times for months, for years, even decades. So anything you can do, no matter how small you think it is, matters. You can write a letter to a legislator. You can talk to your family about it. You can talk to a friend. When we started in New York, we too were all overwhelmed by the enormity. I mean, at that time, oh my gosh, how many people were in solitary in New York State? It was thousands. So it doesn't matter who you are or where you are. If you are convinced that solitary is torture and you feel called to do something about it, you can do something, and it does matter.
Do you know in your state what impact that has on the people's lives that are incarcerated? And if not, that's where you begin. Find out, talk to somebody, go to your jail or your prison, have a conversation with someone who just came home. Find out what it's like and how you can make that change, right? And then you begin to organize. You share that information with other people. Hopefully that individual that just came home, or that person who's currently inside, may want to talk to someone, a news media, a journalist, somebody to write their story, right? That's a beginning, right? And then you start to work through all the systemic issues that brought you to that point, to where you want to start, and work it through to the end.
Our incarceration rate is astonishing. Most people know somebody who's impacted. And find those people, find like-minded people, and don't give up. We're worth it.
Welcome home, my bull. So to meet him at the gate is, when you come home after incarceration, there's a lot of scripture about people being exiled. When they come back in, there's this jubilee and this celebration to welcome you back to the community after exile. There's none for prisoners.
I find the story about the prophet Jeremiah very informative for the work of solitary confinement. When he's in trouble with the king, and they put Jeremiah in the cistern, and so that's a well, and there was no water in there, but it was still mud in the bottom, and so he's basically being suffocated out. He's in darkness. There's this young brother who sees they put him in the cistern, and he advocates on Jeremiah's behalf to the king and says, we can't do this. He's gonna die in there. We gotta get him out. This is wrong. This is torture. And the king finally concedes and says, okay, whatever. And then he goes, this young brother, he goes and he organizes the community. And they pull together, the community pulls together all the fabric and the sheets that they have. They kind of make a harness of sorts, and they drop it into the cistern and say, Jeremiah, put this around your arms. And then the whole community pulls them out. I think that's instrumental for us that are working on solitude, to see ourselves as the advocate and organizing the community by putting the community first, by putting the marginalized first. That ultimately we save ourselves in the process.
Today, as we speak, people have walked out of this facility. Give us the strength to remember that human beings do not belong in cages, that their names are given by God, they are molded by God, and they are created in His image, and that no one is disposable. This is our prayer, this is our assignment, this is our calling. Amen. Amen.
Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, yes, I'm gonna let it shine. Whoa, everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Hallelujah. Keep on talking, gonna build a brand new world. Ain't gonna let solidarity turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let solidarity turn me around. Gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, gonna build a brand new world. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, gonna build a brand new world. Amen.
This is my second time watching the film, and it's so profound to me, the stories that we hear, the efforts that we see on the ground, and what's truly possible when there are collectives of people trying to make a bigger difference this way. And just from the credits alone, you could see the dozens of people and organizations and networks that make things like this happen. And it reminds us how much we should be dedicated to the cause of justice, no matter who it affects, no matter where it happens. Because unfortunately, we often forget that it happens right at our doorstep too. Being in a state like California, where we feel that everything is really diverse and lovely and inclusive, doesn't make it more just or equitable just by having diversity. And I'm really thankful again to Ron, Naomi, Johnny, for the ways that you engage in this work very personally, and how you've been able to do it through the work of NRCAT. So I want to just open up this time for getting to hear from the folks that we've invited in this space today, who've been key in making this work happen, and in working with communities to empower them to really make a difference. Ron, who is someone that I've known for a couple of years now, was someone that I got to reconnect earlier this year at the Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago. And getting to see him and see the work that he was doing with releasing a film like Torture in Our Name was something that I definitely wanted to bring to different audiences. And I'm really excited that we could have this screening today and have this conversation now. So Ron, I'd like to just give you a couple of minutes to really give us a bit of a sense of why the work of NRCAT is so important, but also just as importantly, why something like solitary confinement was such a specific issue to focus on as a part of this work.
Yeah, thanks. And it was great to spend time at the Parliament of the World's Religions, and we had a booth there. And one of our NRCAT staffers, who himself spent 15 years in solitary confinement, was there to have conversation with people from all across the world and many, many faiths. Now, we're an organization of 300 faith organizations that has been around for almost 20 years, the National Religious Campaign Against Torture. And as you saw in the film, it is the one area where, although we have many disagreements with each other across the faith community, the one area we agree on is that it is never permissible for one human being to torture another human being. And I mean, I guess that's where we start at the National Religious Campaign Against Torture. This is first and foremost a moral issue. You need to set aside your politics. You need to set aside, you need to be politically involved, but maybe set aside your political disagreements. You need to set aside other disagreements. You need to set aside other concerns and realize that as a moral actor in this world, you need to be focusing on community. You need to be focusing on solidarity. You need to be focusing on building bonds. And I think that's why we wanted to create the film, because the folks in the film, unknown to everyone, I'm sure nobody in the audience here knew anyone in here, yet you felt that common bond of humanity. When you saw them speaking, when you saw them advocating, when you saw the state legislators take their steps to pass this legislation, not only did you see that common bond that we each have as humans, you saw the ways that we can enhance those bonds and get the movement toward justice going in the right direction, where people who've suffered one of the most horrible injustices you can think of, torture, are there speaking to you through the film. So we hope that this film opens minds, but also opens hearts, and helps people get out and do the advocacy that maybe some of you are already doing, but that we know all of you could be doing. And our organization is, of course, there to help you spread the word in your own networks. We do webinars like this all the time. We have state campaigns in about 20 states. This film is just a little snapshot of what it means to be a human being working to try to end the torture of solitary confinement.
Thanks so much for that, Ron. It's made me think quite a bit about some of the ways in which we understand that this is a multi-faith issue, right? At the end of the day, the mass incarceration system is a large, amorphous, and complicated way of being able to try to focus on law and order in the United States, and unfortunately carries out a lot more injustice than I think we are really prepared to admit. And it makes me want to ask a question of Johnny, to you in particular, as someone who serves as NRCAT's U.S. Prisons Programs Director. With the work that you've done with Ron and so many other advocates in this space, how were you able to develop a multi-faith campaign to address this issue? How do you develop the momentum necessary to create change that we've seen in states like New York and New Jersey, and with other campaigns that you're doing in other states?
Thank you for that. And Ron kind of teased a little bit out of it, but I'll flesh it out. I think that first and foremost, there is the moral and ethical grounding of the issue, right? Like, why is it important, right? Like this idea of compassion, second chances, justice, human dignity, right? And from that starting point of shared values, we've been able to engage people from diverse faith backgrounds in a number of campaigns around the state, around the country, as you mentioned. Secondly is, valuing that the people who have experienced this torture have also ideas about what the solutions are. So ensuring that we create proximity with the people most impacted, while at the same time elevating faith leaders through our shared values. I think every campaign has those kind of two key components. And then, of course, it's the interfaith collaboration. It's not just Christian and not just Muslim. I think because it affects everyone, regardless of what your faith background is, we can all agree around ideas of compassion, justice, human dignity, etc. There's large moments of every campaign also has large efforts around education and awareness. So much of this issue is because people just don't know. I wrote an op-ed around the time that George Floyd was killed. And the reason I wrote the op-ed is because I come from a neighborhood we see, police act oppressive almost every day. But it was the cameras that really brought it to life for the people, except inside of prisons, there are no cameras. So really trying to drive home and increase transparency and kind of shine the light of justice, if you will, on the issue and educate folks on, hey, this is literally happening right underneath our nose, right under our watch, with our tax dollars, And I think the last three things that really kind of stick out for me as I thought about this question overnight, was literally grassroots mobilization. It's really easy to try to get the most influential names, et cetera. But when you really connect with the folks who's most impacted, but also the people in those communities, their family members, their loved ones, they also help create proximity and tell a different story and educate a different audience than maybe folks who are directly impacted have. And that can look like rallies. That can look like start wherever you are and have those conversations, and then of course activating folks through other organizations. So much of this work is volunteer. We try to lean on folks who may already be being compensated to do the work. And even then, our volunteers are really the driving force of a lot of the campaigns. And I'll highlight one person that sticks out for me in this example, and that's Fran Gatelles in New York. I've been on for 10 years now. So Fran welcomed me. She bakes cookies for every rally, almost every rally. She is very short, but packs a powerful punch. She leads an organization called the Granny Brigade. And Fran is a little bit over 80 years old. In fact, she had a birthday 2 days ago. And while on the surface, when you look at her, it doesn't speak power. Fran and others like her are really the driving force of all the change we've seen. Even when governors have vetoed bills, et cetera, the continued momentum and hope. And just the morale of the folks. So that's such a long, extended answer. But really when we ground it on shared values and bring in people who have proximity on the issue and make them credible messengers, whether through shared values or direct experience, we really do make changes. Thanks.
Yeah, and that's exactly those everyday individuals that are really a part of this movement for not just a change of consciousness, but a change of the constructs in which we are trying to engage justice. I mean, this continues to be a very clear way for us to consider that, as a part of a populace, as a part of a democracy, we often feel powerless in the midst of everything going on when these, big decisions are made with our funds, our, everything being done in our name. And we often forget that we actually, as citizens, do have the power to change things. It's our responsibility, actually, to engage more deeply in the democratic process and not to just leave the decision for others because we just voted them in. Because oftentimes, as we now see in the 250-year experiment we call the United States of America, things have from the get-go not been in the favor of those being represented. And it makes me want to further the conversation with Naomi, who's a member of the Episcopal Public Policy Network of California and a part of IRIS, which is the Interfaith Refugee and Immigration Service. Working in a state like California, as I had mentioned earlier, basking in its diversity, basking in its inclusion, we still struggle with a lot of the conversations around mass incarceration here. We have the issue of privately owned prisons. We have the issues of torture in various ways, but we also do have our own issues of solitary confinement. And it'd be great to know what that work has been kind of looking like here in California to advocate against it.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up. It is kind of an odd place to be working in California, that seeing that in other states, the places that we're at that we take so much for granted are, still struggles and fights. But then I think particularly when it comes to issues like solitary issues, like immigration detention, there is a very almost insidious kind of quiet that happens for a lot of folks. I know for myself, my understanding of immigration detention, solitary, et cetera, has really come over the last probably 4 or 5 years. And that has been thanks to different mentors I've been able to be in touch with, folks who have been willing enough to share their own stories with me, both inside and outside of the work that I'm doing. Like Tahil mentioned, I'm working with the California Episcopal Public Policy Network in the immigration branch. So a lot of what we've been focusing on, recently, has been this kind of crux of solitary and immigration detention, because for a lot of folks who are in immigration detention, there is not a violent crime offense. Really, the only offense is either having crossed into the United States seeking some sort of work, or giving oneself up to the power of the United States seeking asylum. And so I think that in doing this work is at least an interesting kind of corner of what this advocacy looks like, because I think one thing that we've talked about, as this is interfaith work, it's also interdisciplinary work. So immigration reform is prison reform, is racial justice reform. But anyhow, yes, I think on the advocacy front, one thing that I've been thinking of a lot recently has been just kind of this notion of the United States as a country that offers asylum, that offers refuge for so many people. But in the process of doing that, we re-traumatize folks with our immigration detention system, and specifically solitary confinement within that. So I think a lot of the advocacy that I've found the most effective has been hearing from the people that are affected. When we're doing advocacy days, when we're speaking to our representatives, nothing has been more powerful, I think, in my own approximation of what this looks like, and also to those that are representing us, than the testimonies of the people that have been inside and that have experienced this torture. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Naomi. And I think Johnny wanted to follow up with that.
Yeah, and thank you for that piece on immigration detention. It's so critical, because it's a completely different ballgame, and the rights are even different. I'm not a lawyer, just naming that, but I will name, and Ron can probably get into it if we have time. But our federal bill hopes to address solitary confinement inside of these, immigration detention spaces, and then I'll mention, on the non-immigration side, particularly for this conversation, folks should know that we had actually 38 leading California religious organizations deliver a sign-on letter directly to Governor Newsom's office. And despite the fact that it was vetoed, the fight there continues. And I'll drop this short little paragraph there in the chat, so folks have that also, like that added, that further context on top of what Naomi just eloquently spelled out in the immigration detention piece.
There are still cases of solitary confinement that are not off the books. The pursuit of changing those rules in places like Louisiana is still a part of a centuries-long process. We saw towards the end of the film that the only way that they've changed solitary confinement is for women who are pregnant, but they still have the rule on the books for many people. And knowing that these systems are still intentionally still targeting women and people of color at large, really does speak to the ways in which communities do need to be speaking up. One thing that I kind of have as a question for each of you is something that came up sort of in undercurrents throughout the whole film, which is, there is this whole conversation about balancing our reflection work and our work as people of faith with being activists. There's a lot of the contemplative space that we hold and a lot of the activism space that we hold. And I'm kind of curious as to how each of you has maybe noted sort of the ways in which people have leaned into their wisdom traditions to really invite community members to be involved in this work, knowing especially that this work is coming from a deeply morally urgent place. We heard from a rabbi in the film. We heard from a Muslim sister in the film. We heard many sort of rallying calls and hymns being sung as being a core part of why people are engaging in this. And I'm kind of curious as to how you feel it moves people into the space to do the hard work. I'm opening the question to either of you three.
Well, I was going to let Naomi go ahead and you can give your perspective, and then I'd like to add a little bit to that too. But let me go ahead, Naomi, please.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, one thing I think, like you mentioned, Tahil, the like kind of leaning on the different wisdoms of individual traditions, as I really love that phrasing, because I think that there are specific strengths that each community brings to this work based on the traditions that they're coming from. So for myself, earlier this year, I was able to attend a Stations of the Cross right outside our local, immigration detention center, Adelanto. And we had been organizing with the folks who were inside at the time. So they knew that we were out there while we were outside, kind of conducting this prayerful march back and forth in like the dusty desert area right outside where people are being held. And I think that there is something very unique and powerful when it comes to blending those two, the activism space and the reflective space, where we're doing a demonstration to show our upset with these brutal practices, and we are maintaining our humanity at the same time. I think that there is a really kind of tenuous balance at play, where if you can not lean too heavily into the activism side, but you have to be able to maintain your wholeness and your humanity in the midst of doing this work. And while you are, being reflective, it's important to have actionable steps to move yourself and your communities into ways that you can be connecting, taking space when you need it, when you need to recharge and rest. Because I think at the end of the day, we're looking for, sustainability and longevity until we, reach better for all of us, until we can really see solitary for what it is and do away with it.
Yeah. And I mean, I would add to that because Naomi really defines why people are involved as people of faith together. A lot of times folks will say, well, wait a minute, aren't churches supposed to stay away from politics? No, we're not. I mean, if you look at your own traditions, it actually says your job is to get the political system to reflect your values. Now, that's a loaded question because values can be all over the place in a society, but you need to advocate. There's a spiritual price for silence. And frankly, as long as you're not giving money to candidates, and if you want to invite a candidate to come speak at your religious organization, you just need to be bipartisan in how you do that. As long as you're not endorsing candidates, you can and you actually must be involved in trying to shape what are the rules that we're living by in our society, because that's what legislation is. So as Johnny referenced, we have a federal bill that is going to try to get the folks out of federal solitary confinement and federal immigration detention solitary, which would cover about 10,000 people, which is a lot. So we've got 20 members of the House. We've got thus far in a bill that hasn't been introduced, we've got 4 senators that are wanting to introduce legislation in Congress. It's perfectly acceptable for the faith community. In fact, like I said, it's required for us to put our values into action and then let the political space have the conversation, but don't let them have it on their own. This issue of who's an expert, Governor Newsom vetoed the bill because he said, oh, it's the people that run the prisons that are the experts. So let's let them, as Johnny said, let's let them decide what happens. Well, in the faith community, we're connected to the people who are the real experts, as you saw in the film, the folks that have actually lived through the experience of what we're trying to change. So we have that unique advantage in the faith community. Some people call it liberation theology from different traditions. It would be named differently. We have that advantage of when we're the best of who we can be, we're listening to the people who've been impacted in our faith traditions. And that's what drives the work to be more politically active that I've seen across the country. And that's what drives people to be engaged in trying to change public policy.
And this makes me reflect a lot on the recent celebration of Diwali Diwali is known as the Festival of Lights for many different communities, but it's celebrated for different reasons. In the Sikh tradition, our celebration of Diwali is known as Bandi Chhor Divas, which literally translates to the celebration of the freedom of the prisoners. Because it's dedicated to a story of mass incarceration that was, built on by empire. There was a Mughal prince who had arrested hundreds of different people, and including the Guru Hargobind Ji, who was gaining popularity for his work on universal brotherhood, serving those who were most marginalized. And the power of the prince was coming into question, and he threw the Guru into jail. The Guru stayed in jail for quite some time, but won the graces and the love of all of the people that were in there, including the prince who threw him in. The prince says, "Oh, okay, I understand what I've done wrong and I need to let you go." The Guru says, "I won't leave until you let everyone else go that you innocently put behind bars." And he said, "Well, I'm not going to do that." They argued a bit, and the prince came up with a compromise and said, "For whoever holds onto your coattails as you walk out of the doors will be free with you." So the Guru spent a day actually adding single threads to his coattails so that everyone could hold on to them, so that once he walked out, everyone else could walk out too. And I think that point of collective liberation that all of our wisdom traditions share is kind of the point. None of us are free if all of us are not free. And how we engage with that based on where we explore that from the religion or the spirituality or the tradition that we come from, and how it compels us to do the important work is why this kind of multi-faith action is so significant and has a lot of impact on the ground. And I come to sort of the core question that I think a lot of folks in this call might be wondering, but people are going to be asking at its core, how in the world do you start doing this work? It seems so complicated to just learn about it, to hear the stories from people, let alone to try to create a space where you are directly engaging with elected officials and trying to change their minds. So where does it start? How do people make sure that they can play a role in this work? So that they can actually see some positive social change in terms of one specific issue, like like solitary confinement.
I can start us off. I think you're right. Sometimes it feels like, wow, this was so big. Like, what is little old me going to be able to do? And one thing I want to say is that it's never going to be one action that brings us to success, but the collective weight of multiple actions that'll get us to the finish line. New York took 9 years. What it took shorter than that, but it took 9 years. Some states are taking shorter. Some states like Texas, I don't even want to estimate how long it'll take us to really, make significant and long-lasting changes there.
Mm-hmm.
I think that everybody has the power to do a few things immediately. First of all, there's a congressperson or legislator in your district right now that says that you support solitary, whether you said it or not. So at the very least, definitely contacting legislators and say, hey, if there is a piece of legislation in the state that, is seeking to end solitary confinement, I'd like to end it. We do have 20 state campaigns that are already active and in the middle of the movie per se that people can plug directly into. And that looks like actions, that looks like a number of things. Some ways that I've seen very successful that folks, can just think about what's available to them, what they have access to, what they're able to do. But from prison ministries to helping people re-enter into society, from providing spiritual guidance to even switching the curriculum in divinity schools, like all of the collective weight of it, does get us, to the finish line. The last piece I'll say that is really important, especially for faith leaders. I think that at the very least, when you implore and ask people within your sphere of influence to change their language at the very least, and not to call people inmates, convicts, etc., to see people as people, we begin to kind of get to a place where we are to think about other solutions beyond solitary. You know, it's like saying, well, what would you do? Would you hold a murderer in solitary? The answer is probably yes, but would you hold somebody's grandmother in there? The answer is like, wait, you know? So just really thinking about language, how we depict people, and really leaning on your faith traditions of, you know, fairness, justice, second chances, or that everyone deserves to be treated with human dignity regardless of, you know, race, color, creed, etc. You know, all of that goes a long way. And then I think some of the work that we've done, whether it's sign-ons with high-level faith leaders, I also say influential, or faith leaders who have, you know, that maybe these legislators, you know, have the same similar faith and ascribe to the same values, has been influential in the past. You know, a lot of our legislative teams include faith leaders, solitary survivors, maybe a policy person and a person from the community. You know, and last thing I'll say is that, you know, faith leaders are uniquely positioned to hold our legislators morally accountable to the values they say they stand for. Right now, we have a president, a sitting president, that on the campaign trail, he vowed and promised every person that he could around ending solitary confinement, along other things around criminal justice. And yet that has not happened despite an international call, et cetera. So I think to the degree in which we can hold our loudest legislators who hold their faith values up front accountable to those same faith values, that goes a long way. And that can look different depending on state, you know, person, a number of things. I'm sure others have other ideas too.
Thanks for that, Johnny. Ron?
Yeah, I'd just say I've always really kind of seen my ministry, or a big part of my ministry, as that of an educator. And frankly, until about 10 or 15 years ago, most people didn't even know there was such a thing as solitary confinement in prisons, and that it was torture. That, you know, they might have thought, oh, well, that's something that happens in Guantanamo Bay or happens on movies, but it doesn't happen here. And then when people find out that there's 120,000 people in our U.S. prisons, jails, and detention centers right now that are being tortured in our own backyards, as Kian in the film mentioned, in every community, in every county, in every state, then there's an awareness there. Now, you know, you can't make somebody act necessarily on their awareness, but it's there. So the fact that this went from basically a hidden issue to now where the New York Times, the Washington Post, conservative publications like the Orange County Register, just recently Teen Vogue, have all put ways for people to understand the issue of solitary confinement, and then tried to connect them to groups like ours. That did not happen by accident. It happened because we were out there educating the community. And if you want to go to NRCAT.org for resources that you can use, study guide to this film. We have short 2 to 3 minute films on our NRCAT.org. They really are designed to help you, you know, introduce a movie or introduce a meeting with a short film clip, having somebody talking about solitary confinement. So people across the country are using these to educate each other. And that's really how I think we're going to get over the finish line, is to take that role as educators in the faith community seriously.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Naomi, did you want to add anything else?
Yeah, just echoing everything Johnny and Ron have already said. I think one thing that's super interesting too is that there are a lot of different avenues into what this work looks like in the grassroots sense. So I think because it's such a pressing issue, there often is this really immobilizing weight that comes with seeing how serious this issue is. But I just encourage folks to not be afraid of the specifics of one community. So, you know, maybe you're not in a metropolitan area that has 5, 6, 7, 8 different ways you can be involved, but you're in a smaller area where there is a group regularly meeting and being in contact with folks that are inside. That is specific to your community. And if that's, you know, the kind of connected and structured work that you can be doing, then I would really encourage you to do that. Or maybe you are in an area where you can arrange to be at a demonstration outside a facility or something of that nature. So, you know, I would encourage folks to not feel that there is a right way to immediately get involved, but to lean on the orgs that are already doing this work, like NRCAT, like CLUE, like a bunch of different ECBOs, depending on which area you're in. But yeah, figure out which channel is open for you to enter into, and then, you know, see who's, you know, already walking that path, not to do the work alone, to get connected with folks that have wisdom, have lines of access that you can contribute to.
Yeah, in Naomi, in your own tradition, I remember the Austin General Convention of the Episcopal Church. And right outside of Austin, there was a major immigrant detention center, and there was a lot of problems there, including solitary confinement. And so in the middle of the convention, we just loaded up buses with about 300 people, went over there, presiding bishop was there, and we made that institution visible to probably some people in that community that didn't even know it was there. And so those are the kind of things that we can do with each other to help give folks, number one, a chance to feel like they're making a difference, which those folks did make a difference. But number two, to increase the visibility of the sites of torture in our communities that are there and that people are suffering through right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, for a lot of folks, it's very important to remember that you need to do your homework when it comes to these issues. It's about, you know, complicated histories. It's about, you know, different systems of implementation in different states and counties. And it's about different approaches in making sure that changes can happen. But as long as you have a groundswell of people that you feel are compelled and are interested in addressing this issue, you will already have a movement towards a positive social change. Don't lose sight of that just because you feel completely under-equipped to address the issue, because this is always going to be a learning and an adapting process. You know, for seeing this film and the guide that goes along with it, I put a link to the chat that people can definitely check out. The guide is amazing. There's some really important ways that you can get to learn how to really engage some of these issues more deeply. One additional video that I will share is by Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. Earlier this year, they happened to do a piece on solitary confinement. That could be sort of something that you could use as a bit of the homework that you can start doing to be able to learn. There are multiple sources that will help you learn, but we know that videos sometimes are often the most helpful. If you spend a day with your community watching an hour's worth of film to learn and see how you can do stuff, trust me, it'll take you a long way. But I again want to thank you know, Ron, Naomi, Johnny, all of you for the expertise that you've shared and for the opportunity for people to learn today. I know I'm certainly still learning quite a bit and processing, and now that I know that there's some important work happening here in the state of California, I feel kind of compelled to reach out to Naomi and say, hey, how could I be a little more helpful in this, and how can we be looping in more of our communities at the United Religions Initiative to be involved in this work? So I'm really thankful for that. I'll now open it up for our community to be able to unmute themselves and ask questions of the panel here today as they feel comfortable. If you'd like to raise your hand or write a question in the chat box, please, you're welcome to do either. But we'd love to hear from you all what your thoughts have been about watching the film and hearing from our esteemed colleagues today, and if you have any specific questions that you'd like to ask. Also, just trying to make sure that people know that they can start their videos and unmute themselves. Let's check that.
While folks are thinking, I'm gonna go ahead and drop this other article as well in the chat. I write a number of op-eds that kind of forward-facing toward the community, but this one is actually asking why philanthropy is not paying more attention to this issue, given all that we know. And we've just been trying to share with folks so folks understand the importance of it. And I also mentioned that solitary is really used to advance other oppressive policies, which didn't necessarily show up in our video. So we're talking about forced labor, cutting visits, like a number of other oppressive policies that solitary is used to threaten people with. And the last correction in the film, it does say that there's 80,000 people held in solitary, but since the film has been completed, our partners, the Unlock the Box campaign and the watchdog group Solitary Watch released a report called Torture in Our Name. Actually, is it called Torture in Our Name? No, it's called a Torture Report. They actually found there was 122,000 people held in solitary. So also want to share that resource as well.
Wow. And the idea that there are people in solitary confinement in every county in the country is just such a crazy thing to fathom. Because the issue then means it is at our doorstep, and we haven't been made aware of it because Department of Corrections don't make it clear. We don't know all of the processes of what happens in local or metropolitan or federal or state prisons. And I guess it's really important to be able to contextualize that as it is a very personal problem because it's happening right outside our door. So thank you for that, Johnny. If others don't have questions, I do have one kind of curious question. In comparing the different sort of campaigns that have been happening, you know, we talk about the 3 states highlighted in the film of Louisiana, New York, and New Jersey. Some have more Democratic leanings, some have more Republican leanings, some have different dynamics of how you can advocate for, you know, incarcerated people at the state level. What have you found to be the most unique or fascinating challenges in trying to do this advocacy work? Have there been things that you've learned about the advocacy process with elected officials that you've realized, wow, this is a lot tougher than I expected? Or have there been things that you've realized that, oh, I've been approaching this with a completely incorrect lens. Do I need to do something different?
Sure, I jump in there. I'll say, yes, politics. I think that before I got into the policy space, I really thought that our legislators truly represented like the people. And although I haven't met every legislator in the world or in the country, I will say that there's a vast majority of legislators who understand the issue is morally wrong. They will agree with everything, but then turn around and ask, well, which one of my constituents is also supporting this, and come back when they're also supporting it. You know, which is sometimes really frustrating. And I've voiced that frustration in a number of different settings. So the assumption that they are on our side is just not true, even with Democratic governors. In fact, all of our vetoes have come from Democratic governors. How's that for a fun fact? And then lastly, you know, almost to be expected, but to see it in action sometimes throws things off. And one of the reasons that one of the bills was vetoed, specifically in New Jersey by Governor Christie at the time, was because the Department of Corrections said, we don't have solitary. What are they talking about? So because they changed the name and the conditions remain the same, it allows them to skirt the accountability in some cases. Hence why so many of our bills have oversight to ensure that, you know, on the implementation side, it's as effective as possible. Some of the ways that we've been able to combat the straight denial of solitary is to amplify even more the voices of folks who are directly impacted, and then also to empower the legislators who are on our side, the champions of our bills, to make undisclosed or unannounced visits to these prison settings, which they can visit a cell, a prison almost anytime they want, and actually get the facts and organize press conferences after that to really combat some of that. Another challenge that we saw was the money issue. You know, it costs too much, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And to put it frankly, you know, what may be seen potentially in some states as a higher uptick on the front end, is actually savings in money over the long run. Whether it's, you know, lower cost of recidivism, you know, less people with mental health concerns. There's a number of different things. And New York really did a great analysis on that when that was a rebuttal at the time in in New York. In terms of the legislative piece, I think that one way we've kind of tried to get around that is the supermajorities, or at least to go for as many possible legislators as possible who are actually on our side and who have that legislative leadership, if you want, that legislative courage to spend some of that political currency to take to take a risk, and it's worked in some states, and in some states the fight continues. I'll be curious what others think.
I think one of the things that has been the most, at least in the forefront of my mind with this, California AB 280 is the no construction aspect of it. Like Johnny mentioned, there's just a lot of, I think, misinformation, disinformation that gets thrown around from opposing forces when you're having bills like this, where police unions will come and just kind of spread misinformation or lies about the cost that this is going to put into facilities, prisons, immigration detention, etc. And the language in the bill is quite clear that this is not that the bill is aiming to, put up a bunch of new structures that would actually be quite counterintuitive to this end goal about liberation. But that the desire in this bill is that people are receiving human contact, and that has been clear from the beginning in the advocacy for this type of legislation. So I think being able to highlight that and really try in some way or another to make that clear and apparent when you are speaking with representatives, even though they will often, understand, like Johnny mentioned, that moral imperative that people, need human contact. There is this need for connection, but there is still that break. So hopefully, I think kind of pairing that human contact aspect with the fact that it's not going to be this large financial strain on the institutions, that it's simply releasing people from this
system,
severe isolation. Yeah, exactly.
And to add an exclamation mark to Naomi's comments, the opposite actually true. We actually close prisons when we end solitary in these states, because there are so many prisons entirely dedicated to holding people in solitary. We're talking South Point in New York. We're talking Northern Correctional Facility in Connecticut. And there's probably a number of other examples. And I'll add, along with that construction piece, the architects, American Institute of Architects, about 3 years ago, their ethics committee, made an announcement that, they found it unethical to design spaces of torture and named death row and solitary, both of them specifically. And I know two organizers exactly who are trying to rely on those examples to stop the creation of new prisons, but just really want to drive point the home that when we end solitary, we also close prisons, because the system is so reliant on punishment that you have entire prisons dedicated to just holding people in solitary, and many people don't know about it. Don't know that.
Well, maybe I could close this on a note of hope, and I hope it's not naive, because I'm based in Washington, D.C., but I've been able to, through Zoom hearings at different state legislatures where they've been hearing bills on whether or not to end solitary confinement, I've been able to be part of the testimony. And more than once, I've seen somebody hear the story of someone who'd been in solitary for 10 years, 15 years, whatever, 1 year, whatever it was, talking to them and saying, here's why we need this bill. And then I'll hear the state legislator, one of the state legislators, in the comments or in the conversation about whether to pass this, they'll say, oh, that sounds horrible. I couldn't even do that for a day. I'm so sorry that happened to you. But then they'll vote against us. But the fact that they can start by understanding, and a lot of times, frankly, it's because of party unity. Politics resembles more like football than it does politics in my mind, where each team has their own uniforms and you'd never cross the line and go play a play for the other team. I mean, seriously, that's a lot of how it feels. But the fact that people at least can make that statement, that they understand how horrible this is, and yet can't break with the forces that are holding them from supporting us when it comes to legislation. I look forward to the day, and I think our work is going to lead to the day where those barriers start to get crossed more than they have, whether it's political party, ideology, racial identification, the different things that hold us, that keep us apart. I do believe we're starting to see some cracks in the walls there, and I find that to be hopeful.
That is deeply hopeful, and we really appreciate ending on that note, Ron. Thanks to you, Naomi, Johnny, and all of the communities and organizations that you work with that are helping to really fix a major problem in our mass incarceration system. And for all of you that joined today, and for those that will be watching this later, we invite you to be a part of the solution. Make sure that you're checking out NRCAT at nrcat.org, and making sure that you're checking out all of the important resources that you can. We here at URI North America are very thankful for the opportunity to share an important film, talk about an important subject, and hopefully become an important partner in this work. So thankful, very thankful to each of you and for what we can do together. Please take care of yourselves and please have a wonderful week. Bye, everyone.